While I was closing $1 million deal in Seattle, my phone buzzed. Mom's voice was shaking, almost breaking. "Calder, your grandpa's badly hurt. We need money for treatment." My stomach dropped. I didn't think twice. I gave her the code to my safe, canceled all my meetings, and sped home like my life depended on it. But when I got there, Grandpa was sitting on the porch drinking coffee perfectly fine. My $5 million, though, was gone. I remember laughing so hard I scared him, because the safe code I'd given my mom wasn't the one she thought it was. Before I share my story, I want to know you're here with me. Just say listening in the comments or tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far my story can reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. If stories about family betrayal and redemption speak to you, please hit subscribe. It helps this channel grow and keeps these true stories alive. My name is Calder Vanette, and this is how I learned that sometimes the people who raise you can also rob you blind and still expect you to forgive them. The sky over Seattle looked like brushed steel that afternoon, soft rain sliding down the glass walls of Altura Financial Tower. I was standing in front of a room full of investors, laser pointer in hand, about to close a $12 million deal. The numbers lined up perfectly, the kind of moment I'd spent years grinding toward. Then my phone lit up Mom, and everything I thought I knew about family unraveled in the span of a breath. Her voice cracked through the speaker, trembling and panicked. "Calder, it's Grandpa. He fell in the vineyard. He's in the hospital, it's bad. They need money right now for surgery." In the background, I heard what sounded like sirens, shouting, and chaos. My stomach turned cold. Grandpa Eugene wasn't just a relative. He was the only person in the Vanette family who ever saw me for who I was. When my father brushed me off or my brother Preston got everything handed to him, Grandpa was the one who said, "Keep going, Calder. One day they'll see you." "Which hospital?" I asked, already shoving papers into my briefcase. "St. Helena Memorial," she cried. "They're demanding an advance. Please, honey, give me the code to your safe. We'll wire it immediately before it's too late." I didn't think. I didn't even blink. 7410, I said, and her sobs cracked through the line like glass splintering. When the call ended, my assistant was standing in the doorway holding a tablet with the final contract. I told her to cancel the flight to Houston to tell them something came up. Her face fell, maybe because she'd never seen me look shaken before. I didn't care. My grandfather's life mattered more than any deal. I drove through the night toward Napa Valley, the freeway slick under the rain. The wipers ticked in rhythm with the thoughts crowding my head. My brother Preston had a life I never could afford: private schools, fast cars, business ventures that crashed before they even launched. I worked 2 jobs in college, built a career from the ground up, only to still feel like an outsider in my own family. The only time family seemed to mean anything was when they needed something from me. By dawn, I was running on caffeine and fear. I just kept telling myself that it didn't matter if Grandpa made it through, the rest could wait. The vineyards of Napa appeared like ghosts through the morning fog, the kind of calm that made the world seem impossible to believe. When I pulled up to the villa, the porch light glowed soft yellow. Through the window, I saw him sitting in his armchair, robe tied loosely, a newspaper folded neatly on his lap. Healthy, whole, smiling faintly when he saw me. He looked puzzled as I stepped inside, rain dripping from my coat. "Why on earth aren't you in Seattle?" he asked. I froze mid-step. My throat tightened. The words didn't come, only the sudden sick realization that something was terribly wrong. The smell of roasted beans filled the kitchen, sharp and bitter. Grandpa poured me a cup, the steam curling in the quiet between us. My pulse was still racing. "You're okay," I finally said, my voice half disbelief. "Mom called. She said you'd fallen, that you were in the hospital." His brows furrowed deep lines cutting into his forehead. "Fallen? I haven't set foot in that hospital since your grandmother's funeral. Did she really tell you that she was crying, Grandpa?" I heard sirens. He sighed, long and tired, the kind of sound that carries years in it. "She wanted me to tell you not to come this week. Said there were family matters to sort through and that your being here would complicate things. I didn't think she'd go that far." Something inside me shifted, anger first, then disbelief, then a cold clarity that left no room for denial. I pulled my phone out and opened Instagram, my thumb trembling. Preston's account popped up instantly, a bright shot of him on a yacht, drink in hand, the Miami skyline behind him. My parents stood beside him, glowing in white linen, champagne glasses raised. The caption read, "Family above everything." I stared until the letters blurred. They had lied. Lied about a hospital, about an emergency, about everything. Grandpa must have seen it in my face. Without a word, he stood and went to his study. When he came back, he was holding a thick folder yellowed at the edges. "I was going to show you this eventually," he said quietly, setting it on the table. "You might as well see it now." Inside were bank statements, trust fund reports, legal documents with my father's signature scrawled across the bottom. I flipped through them, the smell of paper and ink mixing with the bitter coffee. The numbers were precise, relentless. Transfers from the Venet Trust, small at first, 50,000, here 100 there, always for Preston's education, for family business initiatives. Over 5 years, the amounts built into a mountain. There it was in black and white, my share of the $5 million trust, drained bit by bit, repurposed into Preston's luxuries and my parents' investments. I pushed back in my chair, gripping the folder so tightly my knuckles went white. "They stole from me," I said, half to myself. Grandpa's face was grave. "I gave your father limited control of the assets years ago. I wanted to be fair, to give both of you the same chance to lead one day. But there was a clause." He tapped the edge of the folder. "If any dishonesty or misuse was proven, that control would be revoked immediately." My head snapped up. "You still have that contract? The original? With the addendum your father thought no one remembered. It's locked away in my study." The pieces started to fit together: my mother's call, the sudden trip to Miami, the staged family vacation. They weren't just taking my money. They were erasing me from the family's empire altogether. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the clock ticking on the wall, each second hammering the truth deeper. "I should go to them now," I said. "Confront them. Make them explain." "No," Grandpa cut in gently. "Not yet. They'll twist it. You need proof, not anger." He was right, but the silence that followed burned like acid. I looked down at my hands, at the life I'd built through work they never acknowledged, and felt something harden inside me. I pulled out my phone, typed a message to my mother. "I made it back safely. When Grandpa's stable, I'll visit the hospital." A few seconds later, a single sticker popped up, a smiling heart. That was all. I turned to Grandpa. "I'll need a lawyer," I said quietly. "One who doesn't scare easy. And I'll need every original document you have." He nodded slowly, eyes sharp despite his age. "Meredith Shaw," he said. "Your aunt. She left the company years ago because of your parents. She'll help." Outside, the morning light spilled across the vineyard, gold against the dew. Inside, I felt something shift from disbelief to resolve. Whatever game my family was playing, they had just made one fatal mistake. They reminded me who I was. And I was done being invisible. I landed back in Seattle later that day with paper in my pocket and a plan forming like a hard kernel in my head. The penthouse smelled the same leather, lemon oil, the faint ozone of the rain outside, but nothing felt familiar. I called Meredith on the drive from baggage claim and ran her through everything: the Instagram photos, the withdrawals listed in Grandpa's folder, the odd timing of transfers. She listened without interruption, then said the thing I both wanted and feared to hear. This wasn't just family cruelty. It was fraud, and if we moved right, we could stop the transfer that would finish them off. We sketched a 3-layer plan over the phone: monitor, legal lock, and public exposure if needed. I told her about the vault code I'd given Mom. I told her I'd altered the holdings already. Most of the value was tokenized and moved to secure institutional custody months ago. She asked me to set up every log we had and not to touch anything until she had the emergency freeze papers ready. I agreed, but I also knew how fast they moved when they wanted to. Back at my place, I found the study exactly as I'd left it, except for the small improvements I'd asked for after the college years of barely sleeping: a hidden wall panel, a biometric console, a cluster of miniature cameras trained on the safe. I ran the system checks and armed the motion sensors. The safe was the old one Grandpa had joked about when I was a kid, the kind that felt like a relic. Behind its face, however, I'd installed a decoy compartment and slipped in a clean USB-labeled trust ledger. The real assets were away encrypted and untouchable, but the family didn't know that. They'd been trained to look for cash and paper. That's how human greed still likes to feel its prize. Meredith texted an ETA for her lawyer's office. She'd loop in a judge file for a temporary restraining order and reach out discreetly to 3 major shareholders who still cared about the company's reputation. I set up automatic exports from the vault cameras to upload to a private server and scheduled a conditional alert to send footage to Meredith and to the shareholders if any movement occurred. Then I sat back and waited, which is the hardest part when every minute feels like a decision. The logs pinged while I was packing a small bag. A fingerprint scan time-stamped in the early morning hours. The access was by proximity and biometrics, my mom's fingerprint. My stomach dropped in a way that felt almost physical. The feed showed them my father wide-eyed, my mother smiling too hard, both of them working the lock with the code I'd given. They moved like professionals who'd practiced their roles. They laughed when the compartment clicked and hugged each other as if victory were a thing to celebrate. Preston's voice came through on a hurried call. "It's done." The words in the recording were casual, almost bored, and in that boredom I heard the cruelty. What they didn't know was that the USB was a live breadcrumb. It contained a simple program that streamed the exact view of the safe's inner cavity back to a server only I controlled, time-stamped and logged. Every second of them taking the fake bundle, stashing it in an overnight bag, loading it into the car was captured and unreadable to anyone who tried to open the drive without my key. I pushed the footage to Meredith within minutes, and she emailed back instructions. File the emergency freeze, notify the brokerage cops, do not confront them alone, and most important, prepare to go public if the bank stalls. I also set the conditional emails to send the video to 3 major shareholders if any wire transfers over a low threshold were attempted. If they tried to launder money out of the country, the people who actually cared about the business's long-term value would see it and react. When I drove back to Napa that night, I felt less like a son and more like someone setting a trap for a snake he used to call family. I laid out the evidence on Grandpa's kitchen table, screenshots of the yacht, the withdrawals camera stills from my vault. "I won't do this at home," I told him. "I'll take it where it can't be disputed." His hand found mine across the folder, fingers thin and warm. "Where?" he asked. I said the word, and he nodded. The idea of Miami felt obscene, a resort full of people to witness the spectacle, a gala where they'd try to tie off their crime with champagne and speeches. If we could stop the money before it left the country and show the world the tape of them taking the fake bundle, we could both freeze the transfer and royal their image in a way that would make banks and shareholders step back. It was ruthless, but the law can be ruthless too. The vines outside the kitchen window swayed in the wind, and I felt for the first time since the call like I had an edge. We flew down to Miami with the folder and the original contract tucked into a briefcase Grandpa refused to put out of his sight. Meredith worked the phones on the way, court clerks, the judge she could count on, and a handful of journalists who had covered corporate scandals before. The resort where the family planned the announcement was all glass and palms, a place designed to make the wealthy feel immortal. They had invited investors, local dignitaries, and every paper that mattered in hospitality circles. My parents had never been more careful about appearances, which made them vulnerable in the way anyone who worships image always is. Meredith and I split tasks the moment we landed. She finalized the emergency filings and phoned the bank relations officer. I walked the perimeter of the ballroom and mapped camera angles and vantage points. In the back of my mind, I kept watching the footage from the vault, the loop we'd preserved, because proof is a stubborn thing when you want people to stop believing what they want to believe. At her office in San Francisco, Meredith had found one more troubling item, a pending transfer for $1.2 million that was about to be authorized from the trust. If that transfer cleared, the offshore account would receive funds and our leverage would collapse. She told me bluntly that if the money moved, the legal path would narrow to civil suits that could take years. We had to hit them in the one place they couldn't afford to have tarnished their reputation in public and with shareholders. We worked through the night on 3 parallel tracks. First, Meredith filed the emergency order to freeze any transfers and requested expedited hearings. Second, I drafted the social post that would, if needed, be published to Preston's account, short, precise, and linked to the evidence servers so it couldn't be denied. Third, Meredith sent discreet notes to 3 key shareholders asking them to withhold approvals at the gala until the company clarified the discrepancies. This was surgical, designed to create a chain reaction that would force the bank to pause and the guests to question what they'd been told. While we planned, an unexpected call came from my mother. Her tone was low-controlled in a way that tasted like threat more than reason. "You're making a mistake," she said. "The money is safe. If you keep pushing, we stop being a family." I heard the practiced guilt in it, the manipulator's lullaby. I told her flat and cold, family ended the day you lied about Grandpa. She didn't respond, only a silence that felt like a presence. After the call, I told Meredith to be careful, information was already leaking. Someone inside her firm had flagged the emergency filing, and the bank had slowed our request. The morning of the gala, the ballroom glittered under chandeliers, but everything felt fragile, like a glass actor about to step into stage light. Guests sat while servers polished silver and staff adjusted name cards. Preston stood at the edge of the stage like a man waiting for validation he hadn't earned. My parents moved through the crowd wearing the polished smiles of practiced royalty. I felt a strange calm as I checked my phone one last time. The vault footage had been mirrored to secure servers. Meredith had a hearing scheduled, and the shareholders had received my conditional alert. We had cut through half the avenues they could use to escape. Then the bank's counsel walked up breezily to Meredith and said the freeze order was delayed due to a compliance review. The words landed like a punch because it meant someone had interfered. Meredith's jaw tightened. She suspected a contact of my father's at the bank had pushed the review to buy time. Time is the currency of thieves. I decided to shift the fight to public view. If they could slow the law, they could not slow public outrage, at least not without huge reputational cost. I stepped up during the event and, before my parents could start their speech, asked for the mic with the kind of calm that makes a room lean in. I told the crowd I had a statement to make, and nothing about the rehearsed words would save them now. Screens around the room lit up with the footage from the vault, their hands on the safe, the bag, Preston's call. The sound in the hall changed from polite murmurs to a sprawl of shocked voices. My father's face went ashen. My mother's practiced smile cracked. Guests who had flown in to honor a legacy now watched that legacy unravel in real time. The shareholders whispered into their phones. The host's PR team scrambled, but the dominoes were already falling. After I finished, Meredith handed Grandpa the original contract and read aloud the clause that revoked managerial control if misuse was proven. The room, which had come to celebrate an heir, sat stunned as the legal reality took hold. Someone in the crowd whispered that the headlines were already trending. I watched my parents' expressions, not with victory, but with a cold acknowledgement that a life built on curated perfection had been seen fully without filter for the first time. Outside, the Miami sky was bruised with the coming night, and inside the resort, the mask they had worn for years slid off under the pressure of what I had done. The ballroom shimmered like a glass cage, every surface reflecting golden light and expensive deceit. The jazz band played low, polite melodies as guests in designer suits clinked their glasses under the massive chandelier. The banners behind the stage read, "Legacy in Motion," and the crowd waited for the announcement, the official passing of the Venet Empire from Ronald to his favored son Preston. I walked in through the back doors just as the cameras began to roll. Heads turned, whispers moved through the crowd like static. My father froze mid-smile. My mother's hand gripped his arm, her knuckles white. Preston looked lost for a moment, unsure whether to grin or panic. I smiled as I approached the podium. "Good evening," I said, taking the microphone. "It's an honor to witness this grand transfer of power. What a beautiful way to celebrate the death of a family's honor." A few guests laughed, thinking it was some strange joke. Then the lights dimmed and the massive screen behind me came to life. On it, the security footage rolled my parents standing in front of my safe, entering the code 72410, pulling out a bag and embracing like two thieves who'd just beaten fate. My father's voice carried over the ballroom's speakers. "That's it. Transfer the resort to Preston tomorrow." The silence that followed was suffocating. Champagne glasses froze mid-air. My mother's face drained of color. My father lunged for the microphone. "This is a fabrication," he shouted, his voice cracking. "An edited stunt meant to humiliate us." I let him speak, then flicked to the next slide, close-up scans of the transaction records, each stamped with his signature and fingerprint verification. "Forgery," I asked quietly. "Tell them that again." All eyes swung between us. My mother's lips trembled. And then Preston, my golden brother, the prodigal heir, stepped forward, face pale and sweating. I didn't know he stammered. "Mom told me Grandpa wanted to gift me the resort." I didn't. Preston, my father, barked, his voice slicing through the air. But it was too late. The crowd believed what it saw. The live stream had already gone viral. Phones were raised, people recorded, whispered, gasped. On social media, the tag "Beats Venet Scandal" began climbing within minutes. One of the shareholders, Mr. Dunley, an old friend of Grandpa's, was already on his phone calling his attorney to halt the transfer immediately. The ballroom felt smaller, denser, as if every lie that had ever been told inside the family had gathered into the air, finally visible to everyone. My mother tried one last smile, trembling. "Please," she whispered. "Calder, you're making a scene." "No," I said softly, turning to the crowd. "I'm making history." And then Meredith stepped through the door, her presence cutting through the chaos like a blade. She carried a leather folder, walked straight to Grandpa, who stood in the corner steadying himself with a cane. She handed him the original contract, its edges creased but still bearing the notary seal. Grandpa's voice trembled slightly but carried through the hall. "According to the founding agreement, any breach of trust results in immediate forfeiture of control. As of this moment, I am activating that clause." People gasped. Reporters jotted notes, cameras flashed, and the PR staff scrambled to pull curtains across the walls. A murmur grew into a roar as security and two financial officers moved toward my parents. Outside, sirens began to echo down Collins Avenue, the financial police already tipped off by Meredith. The jazz band had stopped playing. The guests drifted back toward the exits, whispering as if they'd witnessed a public execution. I stood in the middle of it all, holding a glass of wine that trembled faintly in my hand. The sweet burn of victory didn't come. All I felt was the weight of what I'd just begun. This wasn't an ending. It was the first strike of the real storm. Morning light filtered through the glass walls of the Venet Resort's boardroom, turning the ocean outside into shards of silver. The table was long and cold, lined with faces that once praised my father. Now they watched in silence. At the head of the table sat two federal auditors, calm and unreadable. Grandpa was beside me, his hands clasped on his cane. Meredith had stacks of files open before her. My father looked smaller than usual in his crisp navy suit, but his voice was still sharp. "My son fabricated this nonsense," he said. "He's always resented our success. He hacked the systems, doctored the footage, and now he wants to destroy his family's name." I met his eyes. "If that video was fake, explain why every withdrawal matches the dates Mom was posting pictures from the Bahamas." A ripple went through the room. My mother sat stiffly beside him, her hands clenched in her lap. One of the auditors asked if there was anyone else with relevant information. For a moment, no one moved. Then a trembling voice spoke from the back of the room. It was Martin, the senior accountant who had worked under my father for years. He stood up, pale and shaking a sealed envelope in his hand. I can't keep this anymore," he said, laying it on the table. "These are copies of falsified invoices Mrs. Venet approved. I was told they were part of a reimbursement structure, but the amounts never added up. I've saved everything." The air turned heavy. My mother's breath hitched. "Martin, don't do this," she whispered, but he kept his eyes down. The auditors took the envelope, glancing at each page. The sound of paper rustling was deafening. Preston buried his face in his hands. "I don't want the resort," he said suddenly, his voice breaking. "I never earned it. I don't even know what it stands for anymore." He looked at me through tears, and for a second I saw him as a frightened child again, the same boy I used to cover for the one who got everything because I couldn't say no. I wanted to hate him, but all I felt was pity. Then my parents began arguing, words overlapping, accusations spilling like acid. My father blamed my mother for being careless. My mother snapped that it was his greed that ruined them. The room erupted until the sound of a chair scraping broke it apart. Grandpa had tried to stand gripping the table for balance, but his body gave out. He collapsed before anyone could reach him. "Grandpa," I shouted, rushing to his side. His breathing was shallow, his skin ashen. Someone called for help, and within seconds the sound of an ambulance siren filled the air outside, shrill, identical to the fake one my mother had played through the phone that day. The echo of it twisted my gut. As paramedics lifted him onto a stretcher, he opened his eyes just long enough to squeeze my hand. "Don't let them take our name down with them," he whispered. When the doors closed behind him, silence fell again. Meredith slid a document across the table toward me. "He signed this last night," she said quietly. "Temporary control of Venet resorts effective immediately in case of incapacity." My father slammed his palm on the table. "You can't do this," he barked. But the auditors had already stood. "Mr. and Mrs. Venet, one of them said, we're going to need you to come with us for questioning. There are active warrants based on the evidence presented. They didn't look so powerful then." My mother's eyes darted between me and the folder in front of me, her expression caught between fear and disbelief. My father tried to speak, but the agents were already leading them out. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving only the whisper of the waves outside. I sat back in my chair staring at the table, strewn with papers, my family's sins reduced to ink and signatures. My hands were shaking, though I didn't realize it until Meredith touched my arm. "They stole my money," I said softly, almost to myself. But what they couldn't take was his faith in me. Outside, the morning storm rolled across the bay, thunder rumbling over the skyline. I looked through the rain-streaked window and realized I was no longer the son who'd been tricked into surrendering a safe code. I was the one rewriting the family's story, and this time I wasn't giving anyone the key. The federal hearing room in downtown Miami was a cold theater of glass and metal drenched in white fluorescent light that made everyone look paler than they were. Outside, the corridors were lined with cameras and reporters. Inside, it was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the steady clicks of pens against notepads. Meredith sat beside me, a fortress of calm in a navy suit. Across the aisle, my parents and their attorney whispered furiously, their faces masks of tension and fear. When the lead investigator called my name, I stood and took the stand. The microphone hissed for a second as I began. "My name is Calder Venet," I said, my voice low but clear, "and I was deceived by the people I trusted most. I told them everything from the first phone call, my mother's trembling voice, the fake sirens in the background, to the moment I gave her the code to my safe because I thought my grandfather was dying. I described driving through the night only to find Grandpa healthy sipping coffee and the realization that everything had been a lie. I explained how I'd discovered the missing funds, the forged transfers, and the hidden attempts to hand the company over to my brother. The opposing lawyer stood to object, claiming the video evidence was obviously altered. Meredith didn't flinch. She walked to the center of the room and gestured for the lights to dim. "Your Honor," she said, "this is the raw time-stamped security footage from Mr. Venet's residence verified by the system's manufacturer." The screen flickered on, showing the continuous, unedited sequence, the biometric scan, the exact date and time overlay the sound of my parents' voices. There was no break, no splice. Just truth in high definition. Then one of the investigators entered new evidence, printed emails recovered from a seized hard drive. The subject line on one read, "Transfer $5 million to contingency account before the ceremony." The sender was my mother. The message had been traced to her personal computer, signed with her encrypted digital ID. She stared at it like she'd never seen her own name before. When asked to respond, she stood slowly, her voice trembling but defiant. "I did it for this family," she said, turning to the audience. "For my husband, for Preston. Calder has always resented us, always doubted our intentions. He wanted to divide this family and I cut her off, calm but sharp. "You pretended Grandpa was dying so you could empty my account. That's not family. That's theft." The silence that followed was louder than any argument. My father tried to intervene, his tone brittle with rage. "Enough of this circus. You think you've won something. You'll destroy the family name." His lawyer tugged his sleeve, but he brushed him off. "I did what I had to do," he shouted, suddenly voice cracking. "I wanted to protect our reputation. If the company went to him, everyone would think I failed." The words hung in the air like smoke. The recorder on the desk blinked red, capturing every syllable. Even the investigators looked startled. Meredith's eyes met mine for a brief knowing second. The rest of the session moved quickly after that. The panel recessed for 10 minutes, then returned with an interim ruling all Venet family assets would be frozen until the final decision and temporary control of Venet Resorts would pass to me under federal supervision. I barely heard the rest of the details, just the sound of the gavel, the camera shutters exploding outside, and the hum of voices rising behind me. When I stepped into the hall, flashes of white light blinded me. A reporter pushed forward with a microphone. "Mr. Venet, how does it feel to see your parents charged with defrauding you?" I paused, the words catching in my throat. "It feels sad," I said finally. "But sometimes the truth has to be cruel before it can heal anything." I kept walking past the cameras, past the chaos, until the sound became a dull echo. Meredith caught up, gave me a quiet nod. "This isn't over," she said. "But you've already changed everything." And I knew she was right. The world I had grown up in, the glitter, the pride, the pretense was gone. In its place stood something stripped bare, fragile and real. The truth. 3 months later, the autumn light over Seattle was softer, muted by clouds that looked like ash and silk. The city had returned to its rhythm, but for me, everything had changed. The courthouse had delivered its final verdict. Ronald and Elaine Venet were convicted of financial fraud and conspiracy to misappropriate trust funds. They were sentenced to federal prison, their remaining assets seized to repay what they had stolen. Preston had vanished from the media, slipping quietly overseas. Some said London, others Barcelona. It didn't matter. Venet Resorts was mine now, legally, permanently, and publicly. The first board meeting under my leadership was somber but resolute. Every face at that table had once belonged to my father's empire of silence. Now they looked to me for direction. I kept it simple. "From this day on," I said, "we rebuild this company on trust. No lies, no deals in the dark. Not again." Applause broke the quiet. It wasn't loud, but it was sincere. I spent the following weeks restructuring departments, settling unpaid wages, and reopening the employee education program that had been frozen years ago. The first initiative I approved was the Eugene Venet Scholarship Fund, dedicated to the children of our lowest-paid workers. Grandpa had always said that fairness wasn't a gesture, it was a discipline. Late one afternoon, Meredith stopped by my office with a sealed envelope. The paper was old, the handwriting familiar. "He left this with me," she said. "Said you'd know when to open it." Inside was a photocopy of the company's very first charter, signed in ink so faded it looked like smoke. Attached was a note from Grandpa, written in his neat slanted script. "They can take the fortune Calder, but if you keep your integrity, the fortune will find its way back to you." I set the letter on my desk and stared at it for a long time. He had known how this would end. Maybe he'd even been preparing me for it all along. That night, as the city glowed beneath the rain, I received a message from an unknown number. "Preston. I don't want the money." It read, "I just hope someday you can forgive me." I didn't reply. I saved it in a private folder labeled History. Some things don't need answers. They just need to stop bleeding. I walked out onto the terrace, the air cool against my face. The skyline shimmered on the glass of the nearby towers. I thought about that safe 72410, the numbers that once represented betrayal. Now they stood for something else entirely: foresight, clarity, strength. The code had become a story in itself, a reminder that trust once broken can also be rebuilt, but only by those willing to face what destroyed it. In the weeks that followed, Venet Resorts regained stability. Old investors returned, new ones arrived, and the staff began to speak with pride again. For the first time, the company wasn't a monument to ego. It was a place that felt human.